Welcome to the debate. Tonight we're diving into something that really shapes how we think about success and fairness and, well, competition itself. It's this idea of the compound head start. Now, this isn't just getting a quick lead. It's about when someone or maybe a company gets such a strong early advantage in their field, could be experience, capital, connections, you name it, that these benefits don't just add up. They actually multiply over time. Think compound interest, but for your competitive edge. And this can create a lead so huge that, honestly, it looks almost impossible for anyone else to truly catch up. We're basing our discussion tonight on excerpts from Compound Headstart, Is Competition Rigged?, authored by Devin McClarty, CO 2025 Deep Publishing Group TM. This is a McClarty source and Deep Publishing Group TM copyright asset. So the big question we're tackling, the really stark one, is, does this kind of head start make real competition impossible?
Does it basically mean that the race is rigged before it even starts? Or can disruption, innovation, still shake things up and level the field? I'll be arguing that yes, this compounded head start builds advantages that are so formidable, so unbeatable, that it fundamentally skews, maybe even rigs, the whole game.
And I'm going to be taking a slightly different angle on this. Look, I absolutely acknowledge the huge power of getting in early. Those compounding benefits are undeniable. But I'm going to argue that markets are dynamic, right? And human ingenuity, technological innovation, these things mean disruption is still a really, really potent force. A force that can challenge and, even completely overturn the biggest, longest-held head starts. So my position is basically that no system, no matter how dug in it seems, is truly permanent. And history, I think, if you look closely, it gives us plenty of proof that competition is never really, completely off the table.
Okay, let's get into it then, because this has some pretty profound implications. My stance is that a compound's head start doesn't just give you a lead. It builds an almost insurmountable barrier, like a wall getting taller and thicker every single year. McClarty's work really spells this out. Once you're decades ahead, your network compounds just like money does. It becomes this asset that you simply can't replicate. And think about reputation. I mean, that's fundamentally unbuyable, right? You just can't go out and purchase 70 years of deep-seated trust or established relationships or proven credibility. Not overnight, not even in 10 years, no matter how much cash you have. Think about someone like Warren Buffett in investing, or Amazon and e-commerce, Google and search. They weren't just early. They actively built these dominant, frankly, often monopolistic positions. McClarty uses this phrase, their flywheel spins, the self-reinforcing cycle of advantage, spins so powerfully it just, quote, locks everyone else out of that core competitive space. So a newcomer, even one with tons of capital or a brilliant idea, they just can't duplicate the decades of trust, relationships, and cultural positioning that a head start compounds into. It's not just about market share, it's deeper. It's about structural advantages baked into the rules of the industry. It's exponential, not linear.
Right. I see why you frame it that way. And that idea of an unbuyable reputation, the flywheel, it's definitely powerful imagery. However, my perspective is significantly different here. I mean, I don't deny a head start helps build market leadership. That's obvious. But the idea that it makes the system permanent or makes competition impossible, that's where I struggle. History isn't really a story of endless monopolies. It's actually littered with examples of incumbents who looked unshakable, who had decades-long head starts, and were then just completely disrupted, sometimes wiped out entirely. Take Kodak. They had an incredible head start in photography, a global empire, defining the industry for, a century? But then digital cameras came along. And despite that massive lead, their dominance was, as McClarty puts it, wiped out. Their advantages, the very things that built the empire, suddenly became liabilities. Or look at more recent examples. Think about TikTok completely stealing Gen Z's attention from Facebook, an audience Facebook spent years and billions trying to lock down. Or Tesla taking on the legacy automakers. I mean, these companies had over a century of head start, massive capital, entrenched supply chains, global reach, everything. But Tesla broke through,
And not just in some tiny niche, it fundamentally challenged them. So this isn't just about finding a small crack. Sometimes it's about completely reshaping the wall. And this brings me to something else. Have you considered that the very act of compounding, of building that head start, it can actually create what you might call blind spots? These make the established players vulnerable. And that's where, as McClarty notes, new thinkers with speed and vision can still break through.
Okay, the blind spots point is interesting. And yes, the Kodak example always comes up. Though I'd argue the core mechanism of compounded advantage is a bit different there. McClarty's argument and mine really hinges on the irreversibility of networks and reputations built over decades. You bring up Kodak. That was fundamentally a technological shift they missed, right? Famously missed it. But it wasn't a direct attack on their network or their reputation in the same way we see these unbuyable advantages today. My point is, a truly compounded network and reputation built over decades, they are genuinely unbuyable assets in a direct sense. These aren't things that just become obsolete with the next gadget. They're deeply ingrained, irreplaceable competitive moats. Think about the trust, the deep relationships built with customers, suppliers, regulators. How does a new player convince the world they're as trustworthy as Google for finding information? Or as reliable as Amazon for getting stuff delivered? Or as insightful as Buffett about markets? Especially when those guys have spent 50, 60, 70 years proving it day in and day out. McClarty's work makes it pretty clear. You just can't buy that kind of public trust. It's like a social contract built over generations, and it fundamentally limits who can even play the game.
I understand the emphasis on permanence, I do. But I just question whether anything in a dynamic market is truly irreversible forever. My take on networks and reputation is that their actual value, their relevance, is constantly being renegotiated by shifting market dynamics, by changing consumer preferences. So yeah, reputation is valuable, obviously. But markets aren't static, right? What people considered a trusted network or a relevant brand yesterday might be totally different tomorrow. That fundamentally changes the playing field. You mentioned Google dominant in traditional search, sure. But their network, their reputation, it's tied mostly to information retrieval. And now we see totally new platforms like TikTok emerging and redefining how people engage, how younger generations, especially, build their main digital networks and decide who they trust online. The kind of trust built through Google's search results isn't necessarily the same kind of engagement or, social connection built through short, personalized videos. A whole generation is building its primary digital life somewhere else. So while the network itself might compound, its relevance, its value proposition, it's always in flux. And that, I think, inevitably makes those older advantages less potent over time. The assets might still exist, but are they the right assets for where the market is heading? Maybe McClarty overstates how static these advantages really are.
That feeds directly into the monopoly formation and lockout idea McClarty describes. For giants like Amazon and Google, that flywheel spins so powerfully, it does create an almost impenetrable barrier. It effectively locks everyone else out of the main game. It's not just about one product or one network. It's this whole interconnected ecosystem, services, proprietary data, deeply ingrained user habits that reinforces their dominance constantly. Look at Amazon. You've got the logistics network, which is unmatched. You've got AWS, the leading cloud platform. You've got the huge retail site. These pieces all locked together, amplifying that head start into this inescapable gravitational pull for both consumers and businesses. Where exactly is the crack in that kind of setup? The sheer scale built and refined over decades. That's a barrier to entry that no amount of startup funding, no matter how big, can realistically overcome. It's network effects supercharged, where every new customer, every new service just makes the incumbent stronger and makes it exponentially harder for anyone else to break in.
But is it really impenetrable? I challenge that fundamental idea. Yes, the scale is immense, I grant you that. But innovation by its nature, it finds cracks. Or maybe more accurately, it creates whole new paths that just bypass the old systems entirely. The Tesla example, going up against those deeply entrenched auto giants, is critical here, because those giants had exactly the kind of massive compound head start you're talking about. Global factories, huge dealer networks, decades of engineering know-how. By McLarty's logic, they should have been absolutely unassailable, untouchable. Yet Tesla came in with a completely new paradigm, full commitment to electric vehicles from day one, direct sales cutting out dealers, a software-first car architecture. And it has completely outmaneuvered them in key areas. It wasn't about playing their game better, it was about changing the rules of the game.
That's not just finding a crack, that's like building a whole new road next to the old fortress wall. The legacy automaker's flywheel spun for centuries, sure, but Tesla started a new, different kind of flywheel, and now it's the one threatening to take over. That seems to prove the lockout isn't absolute. And this leads right back to the blind spots idea, which I think are almost an inevitable consequence of that kind of long-term success. The intense focus you need to compound advantages, it builds incredible strength in one area, yeah? But it can also make you slow, paradoxically, to adapt to new tech or shifts in consumer behavior elsewhere. Kodak's story isn't just a tech miss, it's a classic case of organizational blind spots. They were so invested, so deeply embedded in their film business, which was the source of decades of compounded advantage and huge profits, that they couldn't pivot fast enough to digital. And the irony is, Kodak engineers actually invented the first digital camera. But the organization itself, the inertia, the culture built around the old model, it made them blind to its potential. They saw it as a threat to existing profits, not as a future. The new thinkers with speed and vision were right there, inside their own company. But the weight of their head start, the baggage, stopped them from acting. And that's precisely where external, new thinkers with speed and vision can still break through. Because they don't have that baggage. They don't have the sunk costs of the old system. It's not about being better at the old game. It's about inventing a totally new one.
Okay, I acknowledge blind spots exist, and they can absolutely have an impact. But I'm still not convinced they're enough, in most cases, to truly dismantle a powerful compound head start. McLarty makes a really compelling argument that the sheer scale, the vast resources, the established infrastructure of these incumbents, it often lets them just mitigate the blind spots quickly once they're recognized, or they can acquire the disruptive innovators, or honestly, just outcompete them with brute force. Think about Google. Yeah, they might have had blind spots in social media, lots of failed attempts there, but their core search and advertising business, still utterly dominant. They mostly just absorb or sideline any serious challengers through acquisitions or sheer market power.
Once a new innovation actually proves itself, gets some traction, the big player often has the money, the talent, the distribution to either buy it, copy it, or just innovate faster once the path is clearer. They can afford to wait and see what works, then just sweep in with their massive resources. And that dynamic, that asymmetry of power, it reinforces the feeling for so many potential competitors that, yeah, the race was rigged before you even started. It's incredibly hard for most newcomers, even the smart and fast ones, to overcome that. It's a numbers game, and the established player starts with billions more chips. So, to wrap up my position, the built-in advantages of a compound head start, especially those unbuyable assets like networks, deep trust, crucial market positioning, they create these huge, often insurmountable barriers. These aren't just temporary leads. They are fundamental, structural skews in the competitive landscape.
For so many aspiring people and businesses, the race really is rigged by these early, exponentially growing leads. It makes genuine, fair competition feel like, well, like an illusion in many sectors dominated by these long-established players. McLarty really forces us to question the foundations of competitive fairness.
And just to reiterate my side, while the power of that head start is absolutely real, and it does create major hurdles for newcomers, history shows us again and again that no lead, no matter how big or how old, is totally safe from innovation and disruption. New thinking, being agile, embracing completely new ways of doing things, having fresh eyes, these things can always expose those critical blind spots and find cracks even in the most fortified castles. And that lets new players challenge and sometimes even completely overturn the established giants. The world just changes too fast, technology is too transformative, consumer tastes are too unpredictable for any position to be truly permanent, no matter how many decades of compounding went into building it. The debate really is whether the system is fixed or if it's always fundamentally evolving.
Yeah. It's clear that this whole concept of the compound head start, as laid out by Devin McLarty in the source material, It's definitely complex. And its implications for how we see opportunity are, well, they're significant. It makes you grapple with some tough questions about what fairness even means in competition.
Absolutely. And figuring out whether you believe competition is fundamentally rigged by these leads, or if it's always open to disruption, that really does, as McLarty suggests, change how you see opportunity itself, and maybe how you see your own potential within the market. It's a discussion that gets right to the heart of our economic systems.
And exploring those kinds of questions is what we aim for here on The Debate. We hope this discussion has given you plenty to think about.